Welcome to the Week 14, the final regular season wrap-up here, the 16th season of Blood, Sweat, and Beers. Do you think it matters how you make it to the playoffs or what happens in the weeks leading up to the playoffs? I know we say just get there, right? Once you're there, anything can happen. And that's true. But do you have a sense of confidence going in when you're scoring a lot of points, winning at the end of the season? Is there a sense of dread as you're going into the playoffs if your team is stumbling a little bit along the way, even if you had great success early and mid-season? Let me give you some numbers. 3 of the top 4 seeds, 1, 2, and 4, all lost in the final game of the regular season, and they averaged just 113 points each. On the flip side, the other remaining seeds, 3, 5, and 6, all won, averaged 174 points in their wins. Definitely reason for confidence, even from a 5 and 6 seed, even going even on the season at 7 and 7. Is there a little sense of concern for our 2 top teams, as painful as those losses may have been? Well, those 2 teams get the week off to try to square it up. And we'll see what happens in round 1. Let's take a look back. Final game of the regular season. We got Commish and Snuffleupagus. Commish needed a win to make it into the playoffs. Done. Both teams had a pretty significant score. Each had a receiver scoring over 40 points. The big difference in teams is that Keith had nobody else even half of that. Where Commish had a 30, a couple of 20s, yada, yada. It worked out well. Worst part of the game, well, I guess if there's a worst part of a win for Commish, even with just a single player active on his roster, he still couldn't get a perfect roster. Still couldn't secure that perfect pop. Not to save his life. Terrible roster management this year. It's just the way it's been. That's okay. Regardless of that, Commish is the hottest team heading into the playoffs. Over the past 4 weeks, no one has scored more points. He's averaging 161 points per game, winning 3 of the last 4. Commish gets the number 6. Mr. Snuffy gets to hang out on the couch this week, prepping for his first playoff game in round 2. Our next game, Pet Detectives versus Boogers. Big Bro versus Little Bro Part 2. This is how they opened the season. Both scored a lot of points in both of those games. Big Bro scored just a little bit more. Despite the late push in the season here, Joe comes up 1 game short, doesn't quite make the playoffs. He's taking his talents to the consolation ladder. Now, we did mention the frustration of scoring a lot of points and playing the guy who scores that much more. It is frustrating to play against the guy who scores the most on any given week. However, the 151 that Joe posted, still only 6th best. In fact, every other winning team scored more than 151 points. So yes, Joe was the highest scoring loser this week. You might call him the king of losers of week 14. But however, that all shook out. He got a perfect pop. So feather in your cap, bud. Only 5 teams were able to do that this year. Booger steps over everyone this week. High score of the week and his top score on the season. Although he'll be playing next week in the playoffs. And so I'm sure he's hoping to keep that rolling. Next game, Skibbity versus Jersey Birds. Ian needed a win to keep his playoff hopes alive. Josh Allen said, I got you. In fact, he had the 2 top scoring quarterbacks in the league this week. Unfortunately, could only start one of them. And even more unfortunately, it didn't even matter. He did win. It was for naught. Came up 1 game short in his bid for the playoffs. So he'll be in the consolation ladder as well. Skibbity, lackluster performance. That was a little rough there. He posted his 2nd lowest score of the season. 2 straight losses to end the season. Lost 3 of his last 4. Averaging the least of any playoff team over the last 4 weeks at just 136.8. So he might be a little bit concerned. He did have some points on the bench, so maybe a little better roster management will give him a little more confidence, maybe even a win in the first round of the playoffs. We'll see. Gloop versus Peanuts. Harrison, if you need help, blink. Seriously, I know getting eliminated from the playoffs is very discouraging, but only Don Chris has mastered the art of being able to start an inactive kicker and still come away with the win. But he is a trained professional. Please do not try this at home. 2 wins on the season. Oof. Well, Peanuts needed a win and a little bit of help. And so he did his part. He won, but also he went against the lowest scoring team. Although, as we said, he still would have beat all the other losing teams, so it didn't really matter no matter what. He managed his team pretty well. We look at the pops. In the end, it was irrelevant for him. He will be in the consolation ladder. Fun fact for Poncho, since picking up Jerry Jeudy just 4 weeks ago, Poncho, when he puts Jerry Jeudy in his lineup, wins every time. When he puts him on the bench, loses every time. He's 2-0 with Jerry Jeudy in his lineup, and he's 0-2 when he puts him on the bench. What could have been. Those brownies. Our final game, Reed versus Puzzles. Ouch, good grief, man. I know you had a first round bye. I know that you had the division locked up, but geez, you could have at least given a little bit more effort. Maybe you could have trusted some of those San Francisco 49er players you've got stashed on your bench. I don't know if you're just trying to keep them away from everybody else or if it just hurts you deep down in your heart to try to put them in your lineup. You would have had a much more respectable score. Maybe you wouldn't have been so concerned about what may happen in a couple of weeks when you play your first playoff game. Who knows? But that's the second lowest score. That 88 was second lowest score of the season. Lowest pop we've seen as you look at that. AB now owns the 2 lowest weekly pops on the season. So I don't know how he ended up winning 10 games. That's a bit of a mystery. But actually, we'll look at points scored. It's less of a mystery once we get there. But AB, you get next week off. Get your act together. I want to see something a little bit better going into the second round of the playoffs. Puzzle showed up. He had to win. He had a 40-point player himself. He punched his ticket to the playoffs. Even had a respectable pop along the way. So locked in his number 5 seed for the playoffs. That's what happened this past week. Let's take a quick look at the standings. I don't ever remember there being multiple 10-win teams. 3 teams at 10-4 going into the playoffs. That's impressive. Unfortunately, it was at the expense of several other teams, but it looks like it was really at the expense of Gloop. Sorry about that. 2 wins on the season, 2-12. I don't know if he just was checked out because he won. He got his Pilsner last week. Got his Pilsner last year. He was resting on his laurels. They didn't support him. And so he ends the regular season in worst place, goes from first to worst. Never want to do it that way, but has a couple of weeks to try to scrap his way back up and not end up in last place at the end of the playoffs, the consolation ladder. So hopefully he's able to do that, or we'll be changing that terrible, terrible name. And maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing either. Anyway, looking at some of the statistics that we had over the past season, I guess I can say that now. The season-ending statistics, as we look at the 1 through 6. Keith joins the 2K club, 5th player in Blood, Sweat, and Beer's history to score 2,000 or more points. He joins Poncho, Kamish, Gloop times 2, and Puzzles, who have all gotten just over 2,000 points. Now, as you look at that, it's kind of interesting. Skip over to, let's look at points 4. And just 100 points on the season separates the second from the 9th scoring teams. So it ended up being pretty close as we came down to the end. And no surprise that most of all the top teams are in the playoffs. Reed option is the only one that somehow snuck in, even though he had second fewest points. But as you look at points against, well, that's how he did it. Fewest points against, not by a lot, but by enough. And that's what gave him the division, and that's what gives him the first round bye. Interestingly, Boogers, as you look down there, and Skibbity, two teams that actually had a minus on the point differential and still somehow made the playoffs. So good job for Boogers. He was minus 42 point differential on the season, but still won 10 games. So lost badly, won big, won a little, lost badly. I don't know how that worked out. The numbers are there, and you can see them. Our final pop for the regular season. How did Peanuts do so well, but somehow end up not making the playoffs? I don't know. I guess we're just talking minor differences along the way. Kamish still comes in dead last, gets above the 80 or so that he was riding most of the season. But probably not the surprise that Mr. Snuffy sits at the number one spot there, the only one over 90% pop. So is that a reflection on draft? For instance, did Reed have just a great draft and then have terrible roster management going in through the season, and that's why he came out with 10 wins, but third worst at managing his roster? I don't know. Did Poncho end up having a good draft, good management, and just get a couple of blowout losses? It's very interesting. And even Jersey Birds. Does that mean that he managed his team well, but just didn't have a very good team because it didn't make the playoffs? I don't know. They're just numbers. It doesn't really matter. All right. First round of the playoffs. Enjoy.